June 4, 1942, 10:15 a.m., 30,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey peered through his SBD Dauntless dive bomber's canopy at a sight that would change the course of World War II. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers spread across the blue Pacific like sitting ducks, their flight decks crowded with fueled and armed aircraft. In exactly 10 minutes and 46 seconds, 3 of those carriers would be burning wrecks. 2,181 Japanese sailors would be dead, and the Imperial Japanese Navy's dominance in the Pacific would be shattered forever. "My God," McCluskey radioed to his squadrons, "look at them down there. They're completely exposed." What he was seeing was the result of the most successful intelligence operation in naval history. American codebreakers had not only predicted the Japanese attack on Midway, but had positioned 3 U.S. carriers in the perfect ambush position. Now, Admiral Nagumo's fatal decision to rearm his aircraft for a second strike on Midway had left his carriers at their most vulnerable moment in the entire war. The scene below was a naval commander's nightmare. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu had their flight decks packed with fully fueled aircraft, surrounded by ordnance, ammunition, and aviation gasoline. Worse, their defensive combat air patrol had been drawn down to sea level, chasing American torpedo bombers in what would prove to be the most crucial tactical sacrifice in naval aviation history. At exactly 10:20 a.m., McCluskey pushed over into his dive, followed by 37 other SBD Dauntless bombers from USS Enterprise. Simultaneously, 17 more dive bombers from USS Yorktown began their attack runs on the carrier Soryu. What happened in the next 660 seconds would demonstrate that naval warfare had entered a new era, one where intelligence, timing, and air power could destroy an entire fleet in less time than it takes to eat lunch. The mathematics of the attack were staggering. 54 American dive bombers, each carrying a single 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb, were about to achieve a hit rate that defied all previous naval combat statistics. Pre-war doctrine suggested that attacking aircraft might achieve a 5 to 10% hit rate against maneuvering carriers. In the next 11 minutes, American pilots would achieve an astonishing 52% accuracy, 28 direct hits that would sink 3 carriers and eliminate Japan's most experienced naval aviators. But the true genius of the attack lay not in the numbers, but in the timing. For 6 months, American codebreakers at Station Hypo had been reading Japanese naval communications, learning their plans, predicting their movements, and setting the stage for this precise moment. Admiral Nimitz had positioned his forces based on intelligence so accurate that he knew the Japanese battle plan better than some Japanese commanders. If you're fascinated by these incredible moments that changed history and want to discover more untold stories of brilliant strategy and split-second decisions that won wars, hit that subscribe button and smash the notification bell. We bring you the most dramatic military stories where intelligence, courage, and timing created miracles. Don't miss our deep dives into the battles that shaped our world. The Japanese carriers were caught in what naval tacticians call the death spiral, a sequence of tactical decisions that seemed logical individually but created catastrophic vulnerability when combined. Admiral Nagumo had launched his first strike against Midway at 4:30 a.m., achieving tactical surprise, but failing to destroy the island's defenses. When his strike leader requested a second attack, Nagumo made the fatal decision to rearm his reserve aircraft with land attack bombs instead of keeping them configured for anti-ship operations. At 10:20 a.m., all 3 carriers were simultaneously conducting the most dangerous operation in naval aviation, rearming and refueling aircraft on deck. Akagi had 18 Kate bombers spotted for launch, each carrying an 800-kilogram land bomb and topped off with aviation gasoline. Kaga had 27 aircraft in various stages of preparation, while Soryu was recovering fighters from the morning's combat air patrol. Never before had so many valuable targets been concentrated in such vulnerable condition. The American attack formation had been cobbled together from 3 separate squadrons after 6 hours of searching the Pacific for the Japanese fleet. McCluskey's Enterprise squadrons had found the carriers purely by following the wake of a Japanese destroyer racing to rejoin the formation. The Yorktown dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, had navigated by dead reckoning after their scouts failed to relocate the enemy fleet. What made the convergence even more remarkable was that both American squadrons arrived at the optimal attack moment without coordination. The earlier torpedo bomber attacks by VT-3, VT-6, and VT-8 had been slaughtered. 35 aircraft shot down with only one survivor from Torpedo 8. But their sacrifice had drawn every Japanese Zero fighter down to sea level, leaving the carriers defensively naked when the dive bombers arrived at 20,000 feet. At 10:20:30, McCluskey's dive bombers began their attack runs on Akagi and Kaga. At 10:20:45, Leslie's squadron commenced their dives on Soryu. In naval aviation, timing is everything. Arrive too early and face maximum defensive fire. Arrive too late and find empty ocean. The American squadrons had achieved perfect coordination through pure chance, creating the concentrated attack that naval theorists had dreamed of but never thought possible. The next 600 seconds would validate every theory about carrier vulnerability and prove that in modern naval warfare, intelligence and air power could achieve what battleship guns had failed to accomplish in over 300 years of naval combat. The age of the aircraft carrier was about to be born in the flames of its predecessors. 11 minutes. 3 carriers. The transformation of naval warfare. May 27, 1942, Station Hypo, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In a basement office, 1,400 miles from the coming battle, Commander Joseph Rochefort stared at a partially decoded Japanese message that would change naval history. For months, his team of codebreakers had been penetrating JN-25, the Imperial Navy's operational code, achieving the impossible. Reading enemy battle plans in real time. The message before him contained references to AF, a target the Japanese considered crucial enough to risk their entire carrier force. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, "we've confirmed AF is Midway. The water distillation plant ruse worked perfectly." 2 days earlier, Midway had transmitted a fake message about water system problems. Japanese intelligence had dutifully reported AF has water difficulties, confirming what Rochefort had suspected. Operation MI, Japan's plan to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet, would begin with an attack on Midway Atoll. But Rochefort's team had achieved something unprecedented in naval intelligence. They knew not just the target, but the timing, force composition, and approach routes. Admiral Nagumo's Kido Butai would approach from the northwest with 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, launching their initial strike at dawn on June 4th. More importantly, they knew Nagumo expected no American carriers within 1,000 miles. The intelligence coup enabled Admiral Nimitz to position his forces for the perfect ambush. Task Force 16, built around USS Enterprise and Hornet, and Task Force 17, centered on the damaged but operational USS Yorktown, would rendezvous northeast of Midway and wait. When Japanese scouts failed to detect the American carriers, exactly as predicted, Nagumo would commit his forces to attacking the island, leaving himself vulnerable to counterattack. June 3, 1942, Flag Plot, USS Enterprise. Admiral Raymond Spruance studied the tactical plot with the cold precision of a chess master. His carriers were positioned 215 miles northeast of Midway, invisible to Japanese reconnaissance but perfectly placed to intercept the enemy fleet. Intelligence indicated that Nagumo would launch his Midway strike at dawn, recover and rearm, then launch a second wave. That rearming period would be the moment of maximum vulnerability. "Gentlemen," Spruance addressed his staff, "we have one opportunity to catch their carriers with their pants down. If we time this correctly, we'll hit them when their decks are full of armed and fueled aircraft. If we're early or late, they'll slaughter our boys." The mathematics were unforgiving. American dive bombers needed to arrive during the narrow window when Japanese carriers were conducting flight operations. The attack plan required precise coordination of 3 separate air groups, launching from carriers 50 miles apart. Enterprise's Air Group 6, Hornet's Air Group 8, and Yorktown's Air Group 3 would converge on the Japanese formation at the exact moment when defensive fighters were occupied elsewhere. Success depended on timing that had never been achieved in naval aviation history. June 4, 1942, 06 hours, Flight Operations Officer, USS Yorktown. Lieutenant Commander Oscar Peterson watched the last of Yorktown's search planes disappear into the dawn haze, knowing that somewhere 200 miles west, Japanese carriers were launching their own aircraft. The morning's reconnaissance flights would locate Nagumo's force and provide targeting information for the strike groups preparing on American flight decks. At 06:45, PBY Catalina pilot Lieutenant Howard Adey transmitted the message that every American sailor was waiting for. Carrier bearing 320 degrees, distance 180 miles, course 135, speed 25. 2 carriers and battleships bearing 320 degrees, distance 180. The Japanese fleet had been found, exactly where codebreakers predicted, following the course and timing intelligence had specified. The discovery triggered the largest carrier airstrike in Pacific War history. Enterprise launched 60 aircraft, Hornet 59, and Yorktown 35, 154 bombers, fighters and torpedo planes, heading toward a rendezvous with 4 of Japan's finest aircraft carriers. But the real weapon wasn't the aircraft. It was the intelligence that would place them over their targets at the perfect moment. 08:30 hours, Combat Information Center, USS Enterprise. The first reports from the attacking torpedo squadrons painted a picture of devastating American losses and apparent Japanese victory. VT-8 from Hornet had found the carriers first, attacking without fighter escort and losing 14 of 15 aircraft. VT-6 from Enterprise met similar fate, followed by VT-3 from Yorktown. Of 41 torpedo bombers launched, only 6 would return. But the torpedo attacks had achieved something more valuable than hits. They had drawn every Japanese Zero fighter down to deck level, leaving the carriers defensively naked. At 30,000 feet, American dive bomber squadrons were approaching their targets completely undetected, their presence masked by the low-level attacks that were being massacred below. Commander Wade McCluskey, leading Enterprise's dive bombers, had been searching for over 2 hours when he spotted the wake of Japanese destroyer Arashi racing to rejoin the carrier formation. Following that wake led him directly to Nagumo's force at the exact moment when all 4 carriers were conducting flight operations, recovering fighters, rearming bombers, and preparing for their second strike on Midway. 10:15 hours, bridge of carrier Akagi. Admiral Nagumo faced the most critical decision of his career. His morning strike had damaged Midway, but failed to neutralize the island's defenses. His air strike leader was requesting a second attack, which would require rearming the reserve aircraft with land attack bombs. But intelligence reported possible American ships to the northeast. Should he keep his aircraft armed for anti-ship operations? At 10:15, Nagumo made the fatal decision. Prepare second attack on Midway. Replace torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs with land bombs. Across his 4 carriers, ordnance crews began the complex process of rearming 108 aircraft, creating the most vulnerable moment in Japanese naval history. What Nagumo couldn't know was that 5 minutes later, American dive bombers would appear overhead at the exact moment when his flight decks were crowded with fueled aircraft, scattered ordnance, and busy maintenance crews. The intelligence war that had begun in basement offices at Pearl Harbor was about to culminate in 11 minutes of tactical perfection. The stage was set for the most decisive air attack in naval history. June 4, 1942, 10:20 a.m., SBD Dauntless over carrier Akagi. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey rolled his dive bomber inverted and pulled into the steepest dive of his career, the Japanese flagship Akagi growing larger in his bomb sight with each passing second. Behind him, 37 more SBDs from Enterprise followed in textbook formation, each pilot selecting his target on the flight deck, packed with armed and fueled aircraft. At this exact moment, 200 miles away, Americans on Midway were watching the second wave of Japanese bombers approaching their island, unaware that the enemy carriers were about to be obliterated. The scene below represented every naval aviator's perfect target. Akagi's deck was crowded with 18 Kate bombers, armed with 800-kilogram land bombs, refueling hoses snaking across the deck, and ammunition carts positioned near aircraft. Ordnance crews had been changing the armament from anti-ship to land attack configuration for the past hour, leaving both types of bombs scattered across the deck in what would become a catastrophic fire hazard. At 10:20:15, McCluskey released his 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb from 2,500 feet. The weapon struck Akagi's flight deck amidships, penetrating into the hangar deck, where it detonated among stored aircraft and aviation gasoline. The explosion touched off secondary fires that began cooking off the scattered bombs and torpedoes left by the rearming operation. 10-20-30, dive bomber attack on Kaga. Lieutenant Earl Gallagher led his squadron in simultaneous attacks on the carrier Kaga, whose deck was even more congested than Akagi's. The massive converted battleship carried 27 aircraft in various stages of preparation, with additional planes spotted in the hangar deck. Gallagher's bomb struck the forward elevator, while Lieutenant Norman Kleiss scored a direct hit amidships that detonated in the aircraft storage area. The attack on Kaga demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of concentrated bombing against vulnerable targets. 4 1,000-pound bombs struck within 30 seconds, each detonating among fueled aircraft and stored ordnance. The resulting explosions were so violent that they lifted the carrier's forward elevator completely off its tracks and hurled it against the island superstructure. Kaga's damage control officer Commander Yoshio Kunisada later described the scene. The entire hangar deck became a furnace. Exploding bombs and torpedoes created a chain reaction that made firefighting impossible. In 5 minutes, the ship was burning from stem to stern. The 38,200-ton carrier, one of Japan's most powerful, was effectively destroyed in the time it takes to make coffee. 10-20-45, Yorktown's attack on Soryu. 17 dive bombers from USS Yorktown, led by Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, commenced their attack runs on carrier Soryu. Leslie's squadron had arrived by pure navigation after losing contact with their target, but their timing was perfect. Soryu was in the middle of recovering fighters from the morning's combat air patrol, her deck busy with landing operations. The attack on Soryu showcased the tactical evolution of dive bombing. Leslie's pilots had trained extensively in group attacks, coordinating their dives to overwhelm defensive fire and ensure multiple hits. 3 bombs struck Soryu within 45 seconds, one penetrating the forward flight deck, another hitting the island superstructure, and the third detonating in the hangar deck among stored aircraft. Captain Ryusaku Yanagimoto, commanding Soryu, watched helplessly as his ship transformed from operational carrier to blazing wreck in less than 2 minutes. The 8,800-ton vessel, veteran of Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean campaigns, was gutted by fires that reached 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and made damage control efforts impossible. 10-22, the chain reaction begins. The 3 simultaneous attacks had achieved something unprecedented in naval warfare: the destruction of 3 major warships in 90 seconds. But the real devastation was just beginning as secondary explosions started chain reactions that would burn for hours. On Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the fires reached the torpedo storage area at 10:23, creating explosions that could be felt 20 miles away. The ship's 91-octane aviation gasoline ignited in spectacular fireballs that rose 500 feet above the flight deck. Within minutes, the temperature in the hangar deck reached levels that made human survival impossible. Kaga's destruction was even more dramatic. At 10:24, her ammunition magazines detonated in a series of explosions that broke the carrier's back and sent debris raining across a square mile of ocean. The blast was so powerful that it damaged nearby destroyer Isokaze and showered the battleship Haruna with burning fragments. 10:25, damage assessment. 5 minutes after the attack began, all 3 carriers were burning beyond salvation. Akagi, flagship of the Kido Butai, was evacuated by Admiral Nagumo and his staff as uncontrolled fires reached the bridge level. Kaga was listing 20 degrees and taking water through bomb holes in her hull. Soryu's hangar deck had become an inferno that consumed everything combustible. The human cost was staggering. Akagi lost 267 officers and men, including some of Japan's most experienced naval aviators. Kaga's casualties reached 811, while Soryu suffered 718 deaths. Most tragically, the majority of these sailors died not from the initial bombing, but from fires and explosions that continued for hours after the attack. Captain Aoki, commanding Kaga, described the horror. Men were trapped in compartments filled with smoke and flames, We could hear them screaming, but the fires were too intense to mount rescue attempts. The ship became a crematorium for hundreds of my sailors. 1026 Base. Strategic implications. As the three carriers burned, Japanese naval supremacy in the Pacific died with them. Each vessel represented years of construction, millions of dollars in investment, and decades of accumulated naval aviation experience. More importantly, they carried Japan's most skilled pilots and aircrew, human resources that could never be replaced. The attack had also demonstrated the vulnerability of aircraft carriers to concentrated air attack. Despite their speed, maneuverability, and defensive armament, the world's most powerful warships could be destroyed in minutes when caught at the wrong moment with the right tactics. 10:31 So, the 11 minutes end. At exactly 10:31 a.m., the last American dive bomber pulled out of its attack run, ending the most decisive 11 minutes in naval history. In 660 seconds, 54 American aircraft had destroyed 3 carriers, killed 1,596 Japanese sailors, and eliminated 280 aircraft. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carrier striking force, which had dominated the Pacific for 6 months, was reduced to a single operational carrier. The mathematics of destruction were staggering. A 52% hit rate against the most challenging targets in naval warfare, achieved by pilots who had never before attacked enemy carriers in combat. The success validated both American dive bomber tactics and the intelligence operation that had made the ambush possible. As smoke columns rose 10,000 feet above the burning carriers, Admiral Nagumo faced a reality that would define the rest of the Pacific War. Japan's naval supremacy had been shattered in less time than it takes to conduct a normal flight operation. The 11 minutes that changed everything were over, but their consequences would echo through the remainder of World War II and beyond. June 4, 1942, 11:15 a.m., Flag Bridge, Carrier Hiryu. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi stared in disbelief at the 3 pillars of smoke that had been the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy just 1 hour earlier. As the sole surviving carrier of the Kido Butai, Hiryu represented Japan's last hope of salvaging victory from catastrophic defeat. "Launch immediate counterattack," Yamaguchi ordered. "We must sink at least 1 American carrier to justify this disaster." What Yamaguchi couldn't know was that his desperate counterattack would only complete the destruction of Japanese naval aviation. Hiryu launched 40 aircraft in 2 waves against USS Yorktown, achieving some success, but losing most of her experienced pilots in the process. When American dive bombers found Hiryu at 5 p.m., the last Japanese carrier joined her sisters in flames, completing the most decisive naval victory in American history. The statistical reality was overwhelming. In 1 day, Japan had lost 4 aircraft carriers, 2,155 sailors, 248 aircraft, and most crucially, hundreds of irreplaceable naval aviators. The Kido Butai, which had terrorized the Pacific from Pearl Harbor to Ceylon, was completely annihilated. Never before in naval history had a single battle destroyed an entire fleet. June 5, 1942, 02:00 a.m., burning hulk of Akagi. Captain Taijiro Aoki made the most painful decision of his naval career, ordering the scuttling of Admiral Nagumo's former flagship. Akagi had burned for 15 hours, her hangar deck temperatures reaching 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit as aviation fuel and ordnance continued exploding. At 02:00 a.m., Japanese destroyers fired torpedoes into the carrier's hull, sending her to the bottom with 267 of her crew. The ceremonial aspect of Akagi's loss was devastating to Japanese morale. As flagship of the Pearl Harbor attack force, she symbolized Japan's early war victories and naval supremacy. Her destruction by American dive bombers represented not just tactical defeat, but the failure of Japanese strategic assumptions about carrier warfare and American fighting capability. Kaga followed at 07:25 a.m., her massive hull finally succumbing to internal explosions that had been cooking off for 9 hours. The converted battleship took 801 men with her, including Captain Jisaku Okada, who chose to go down with his ship rather than face the shame of surrender. Soryu sank at 07:13 a.m. with 718 casualties, while Hiryu was scuttled the following morning after burning through the night. June 6, 1942, Imperial Japanese Navy General Staff, Tokyo. The cable from Admiral Yamamoto contained the most shocking military reversal in Japanese history. 4 carriers sunk, heavy casualties among aircrew. Kido Butai ceased to exist as fighting force. Request permission to withdraw all forces from Midway operation. The strategic implications were immediately apparent to the Naval General Staff. Japan's carrier construction program could not replace the losses for at least 2 years, while the United States was launching new Essex-class carriers every few months. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Japan had lost the capacity for offensive operations in the Pacific. Admiral Osami Nagano, Chief of Naval General Staff, summarized the disaster in a classified assessment. Loss of 4 carriers represents destruction of Japan's naval aviation striking power. Without carrier superiority, we cannot support extended operations beyond land-based air cover. The war has fundamentally changed. June 10, 1942, Analysis Report, U.S. Navy War College. The preliminary battle analysis conducted by American naval intelligence revealed tactical lessons that would reshape naval warfare doctrine. The concentration of dive bomber attacks against vulnerable carriers had achieved results that pre-war theorists had considered impossible. Multiple major warships destroyed in minutes by relatively small numbers of aircraft. Captain Forrest Sherman, leading the analysis team, identified the crucial factors. Perfect intelligence enabled optimal positioning of forces. Coordinated attacks overwhelmed defensive capabilities. Most importantly, catching enemy carriers during flight operations maximized vulnerability. This engagement validates carrier aviation as the dominant naval warfare system. The intelligence aspects were equally significant. Station Hypo's code-breaking had provided such accurate information that American forces knew Japanese plans better than some Japanese commanders. The success validated signals intelligence as a strategic weapon capable of determining battle outcomes before the first shot was fired. July 1942, Casualty Reports and Strategic Assessment. The human cost of Japan's defeat at Midway extended far beyond the 2,155 sailors lost with their ships. The destruction of experienced aircrew represented an irreplaceable loss that would cripple Japanese naval aviation for the remainder of the war. Carrier pilots required years of training, and Japan had lost over 100 of her most skilled aviators in a single day. Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Murata, one of the few surviving torpedo bomber pilots, provided a sobering assessment. We lost not just ships, but the foundation of our naval air power. The men who flew at Pearl Harbor, who sank Prince of Wales and Repulse, who dominated the Indian Ocean, most are gone. Their replacements cannot match their skill or experience. The material losses were equally devastating. 4 carriers represented 40% of Japan's total carrier strength, while the United States was preparing to launch 17 new carriers by 1944. The industrial mathematics were unforgiving. American shipyards could replace Midway's losses in 6 months, while Japan would require 2 years to rebuild her carrier fleet. August 1942, USS Enterprise, Pearl Harbor. Admiral Chester Nimitz addressed the assembled aircrew who had achieved the impossible at Midway. The ceremony recognized not just their tactical success, but their role in the fundamental transformation of naval warfare. "Gentlemen," Nimitz declared, "you have proven that intelligence, courage, and precise execution can overcome any numerical disadvantage. The age of the battleship has ended. The age of naval aviation has begun." The decorations were extensive. Lieutenant Commander McCluskey received the Navy Cross, as did numerous dive bomber pilots whose accurate bombing had destroyed the Japanese carriers. But the real recognition was strategic. American naval doctrine would henceforth prioritize carrier aviation over traditional surface warfare. Long-term strategic impact. The 11 minutes of destruction at Midway had consequences that extended throughout the Pacific War and beyond. Japan never again achieved naval superiority, while American carrier task forces grew increasingly powerful. The fast carrier task force concept, which would dominate Pacific operations through 1945, was born from the lessons learned during those crucial minutes. The intelligence revolution was equally significant. The success of code-breaking at Midway established signals intelligence as a permanent component of American military planning. Future operations would routinely incorporate intercepted enemy communications, creating advantages that often determined battle outcomes before combat began. Modern legacy. Today's naval warfare still reflects lessons learned during those 11 decisive minutes. The vulnerability of high-value targets to concentrated attack, the importance of timing in naval aviation, and the decisive advantage of superior intelligence all trace their doctrinal origins to the Midway engagement. The Battle of Midway proved that in modern warfare, traditional concepts of naval power, tonnage, armor, firepower, could be overcome by intelligence, innovation, and precise execution. 11 minutes had not just sunk 4 carriers, they had sunk an empire's naval supremacy and ushered in the American century in the Pacific. December 7th, 1942, 6 months after Midway. Admiral Ernest King stood before the assembled Joint Chiefs of Staff with battle reports that would have been considered fantasy just 1 year earlier. In 6 months since Midway, American carrier task forces had sunk 23 Japanese warships, destroyed 847 aircraft, and seized control of vast Pacific territories. The 11 minutes of destruction over the Japanese fleet had unleashed a revolution in naval warfare that was reshaping the entire conflict. "Gentlemen," King announced, "Midway proved that naval supremacy now belongs to whoever controls the air above the sea. We're witnessing the end of 400 years of surface ship dominance and the beginning of the aviation age." The statistics were undeniable. Since June 4th, American carriers had operated with virtual impunity, while Japanese surface forces remained confined to defensive positions. The transformation was visible in American shipbuilding priorities. Before Midway, the Navy had planned to build 10 new battleships and 6 carriers. After Midway, those numbers reversed, 24 carriers and only 4 battleships. The 11 minutes had not just won a battle, they had redefined American naval strategy for the remainder of the war. March 1943, Imperial Japanese Navy War College, Tokyo. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius behind the Pearl Harbor attack plan, delivered a classified lecture that represented Japan's acknowledgement of their strategic defeat. The American success at Midway was not luck, Genda explained to assembled naval officers. It was the result of superior intelligence, better tactics, and innovative application of carrier aviation principles. Genda's analysis identified the critical factors that had enabled American success: concentration of force at the decisive point, perfect timing achieved through intelligence superiority, and tactical coordination that maximized firepower while minimizing exposure. These principles would become standard doctrine for naval aviation worldwide. But Genda's most sobering conclusion concerned Japan's inability to replicate American success. "We lack the industrial capacity to replace our losses, the fuel to train replacement pilots, and the intelligence capabilities to achieve similar tactical advantages. The Americans have systematized victory while we rely on individual heroism." June 4th, 1943, First Anniversary Analysis. 1 year after the 11-minute destruction of the Kido Butai, American naval intelligence produced a comprehensive study that codified the lessons learned. The Midway analysis became required reading at the Naval War College and influenced carrier operations throughout the Pacific campaign. The study identified 3 revolutionary concepts that had emerged from the battle. First, the intelligence multiplier effect. Accurate enemy information could magnify combat effectiveness exponentially. Station Hypo's code-breaking had enabled 3 American carriers to defeat 4 Japanese carriers with superior positioning and timing. Second, the vulnerability window theory. Even the most powerful warships had moments of extreme vulnerability that could be exploited by precise attacks. The Japanese carriers' rearming operations had created a tactical opportunity that lasted exactly 11 minutes. Third, the concentration doctrine. Multiple simultaneous attacks could overwhelm defensive systems that might successfully repel individual strikes. The coordinated dive bomber attacks had achieved results impossible through sequential assaults. 1944 Fast Carrier Task Force Operations. The tactical principles validated at Midway reached their ultimate expression in the fast carrier task force operations that dominated the final 2 years of the Pacific War. Task Force 58, often comprising 15 carriers and 900 aircraft, represented the evolution of concepts first proven during those 11 decisive minutes. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commanding Task Force 58, explicitly credited Midway with establishing the operational framework. Every carrier strike we conduct follows principles established by McCluskey and Leslie over the Japanese fleet. Concentrate maximum firepower at the decisive moment. Achieve tactical surprise through superior intelligence, and coordinate attacks to overwhelm enemy defenses. The statistical results validated these principles on an enormous scale. American carrier task forces achieved kill ratios exceeding 10.1 against Japanese. Aviation sank over 400 enemy warships and supported amphibious operations across 5,000 miles of Pacific Ocean. The 11 minutes had proven scalable to strategic dimensions. Post-war technical analysis. The detailed technical analysis conducted after the war revealed the scientific precision behind what had appeared to be tactical intuition. McCluskey's dive bomber formations had achieved optimal attack geometry by pure chance, but post-war calculations confirmed their approaches were mathematically perfect for maximum hit probability. The bomb damage analysis was equally revealing. The 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs used at Midway had been designed for battleship attacks, but their penetration characteristics proved ideal for carrier flight decks. The weapons had penetrated into hangar decks where they detonated among stored aircraft and aviation fuel, creating the chain reactions that destroyed the carriers. Wind, patterns, target spacing, and attack timing had all combined with mathematical precision to create the perfect tactical situation. American industrial capacity then scaled these tactical lessons into strategic dominance through mass production of carriers, aircraft, and trained pilots. Modern naval doctrine legacy. Today's naval warfare continues to reflect principles established during those 11 minutes above the Pacific. The concept of anti-access area denial, which dominates modern naval thinking, evolved directly from Midway's demonstration that air power could deny sea control to surface fleets. The importance of intelligence in naval operations, now institutionalized in every major navy, traces its doctrinal origins to Station Hypo's success in reading Japanese codes. Modern signals intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, and electronic warfare all represent evolution of capabilities first proven decisive at Midway. Precision strike warfare, whether conducted by aircraft, missiles, or unmanned systems, follows targeting principles established by American dive bomber pilots in 1942, concentrate maximum firepower against high-value targets during their moments of maximum vulnerability. Final assessment. The 11 minutes between 10:20 and 10:31 a.m. on June 4, 1942, represented more than tactical success. They marked the transition from one era of naval warfare to another. In those 66 seconds, the age of the battleship ended, and the age of naval aviation began. Intelligence became as important as firepower, timing as crucial as tonnage, and coordination as decisive as courage. The American pilots who dove on Japanese carriers that morning couldn't have known they were participating in a revolution. They were simply executing their mission with the precision their training had instilled and their intelligence had enabled. But their success validated principles that would reshape naval warfare for the next 80 years. 11 minutes had changed everything: naval doctrine, strategic balance, and the ultimate outcome of World War II. The dive bomber pilots, who achieved 52% accuracy against the world's most powerful aircraft carriers, had proven that in modern warfare, the side with better intelligence, superior tactics, and perfect timing could overcome any material disadvantage. The revolution born in those 11 minutes continues to influence naval warfare today, proving that decisive moments in military history are often measured not in hours or days, but in the precise application of force at the exact moment when it can achieve maximum effect. If this incredible story of precision, timing, and tactical brilliance captivated you as much as it did us, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell for more untold stories of the moments that changed history, Share this video with anyone who appreciates how intelligence, innovation, and split-second decisions can alter the course of entire wars.